Pretty sure they're not going back to Boston, but ultimately he decides, well, he's got to come back to New York. But he didn't just come to New York. Him and a whole fleet of ships, to say the least, came to New York. When looking out into New York Harbor and seeing the amount of ships that just paired up with General Howe, to New York, is always being described as it looks like all of London is afloat. There was over 400 ships full of soldiers and food and equipment, and they were ready for war. This is by far the largest amphibious landing in the United States ever. So keep that part in mind. So General Howe shows up. Washington is there. Greene is there. Greene is actually in Brooklyn at this point. It was called Brooklyn Heights, and that's where the main battle takes place. Greene is there. Greene helped with the planning, but unfortunately he was sick and did not attend the battle at all. Greene was a very sickly child with asthma, other breathing problems. He would get sick pretty easily. It would bug him throughout his whole life. But his men fought with the Rhode Island 1st and 2nd. The Maryland 1st and 2nd regiments were there. All 4 of those regiments are going down in history as being some of the most brave and valiant soldiers in the Continental Army. They didn't win. The British did. The British came and basically swept right to the edge of Brooklyn Heights with no way to escape. General Howe decides, other than delivering the blow right now, oh, there's more deer again. There's a lot of deer back here. But delivering the final blow right now, what he's going to do is wait until the morning and then take care of it then. His men are very tired. They've been fighting all day, marching all day across half of Long Island. And what is being called an act of providence, the soldiers actually find a way to escape Long Island. So going from Long Island to Manhattan, it's happened to be a very foggy night. You couldn't hear anything going on, including the movement of soldiers. What Washington did was actually set up, a regiment of soldiers to basically man fires and make noise, make it seem like all the soldiers are still here, while everybody escaped. They themselves, those who stayed behind, ended up escaping as well, and Washington was the last man to leave. And then they went to Long Island. But Long Island was a disaster, to say the least. A nice little stream here. There we go. Yay. Yeah, to say the least. They were chased all over Manhattan, basically up the east side into Harlem, and then straight across over to the Hudson River compared to the East River. When they get to the Hudson River, we have Fort Washington there. And Fort Washington is actually directly below the bridge of the George Washington Bridge in Manhattan. So keep that in mind if you ever wanted to visit it. There is things to see there. So the plan was to just evacuate and go. The War Council was all on the same page of this is what needs to be done, except for Greene. Here's where we just were, by the way. We actually turned around right here. So Greene disagrees. He says we can defend the fort. There's 3,000 men. There's 19 pieces of artillery. We can definitely hold this fort off without any issue. Generals Washington and Greene had crossed the Hudson to just basically watch from what was called Fort Lee on the New Jersey side, and to see what was going on over there, and trying to plan things out accordingly. And disaster struck. The whole fort was completely surrounded. Hessians on the northern side, British coming in from both east and west sides. Excuse me, east and south sides. There wasn't any escape. On our end, luckily there weren't a ton of casualties, or fatalities, I guess you could say, but everybody that was remaining alive was captured. All their artillery, all those men. So when Washington marched down to Long Island, there was 19,000 people in the army. When the army had evacuated into New Jersey across from Fort Washington, there was now only 2,000 men. We're talking in a matter of a week's time when this happens, by the way. So we're in some pretty dire circumstances at this point, and not quite sure exactly where to go and what to do. Little did anybody know, including Washington, General Greene had actually already planned for this. And what I mean is, knowing that this would be a route of travel at some point, leaving New York into New Jersey and going towards Pennsylvania, Greene had actually set up supply lines to be, for the army to basically still replenish themselves across this, across New Jersey. So he set it up for, oddly enough, of about 2,000 men to be, well cared for while still going. Washington played special close attention to that, because it just wasn't expected or even heard of. All right, pause for a moment. Here we are. This is our second waterfall. It's much smaller, but definitely still really cool. A bunch of geese over there and ducks. I wish they were closer, but there they are. The river's really flowing down there now. But we'll move on. So the army, through basically Greene's plan, had just went right along to where the supply lines were and went directly into Pennsylvania, crossing the Delaware River. So keep in mind, we're in the year 1776 still here, even though I didn't even mention that. But here we are in 1776, and it's about to end, and so is the army. They're especially beat up right now after this. All of General Howe's army did not follow Washington into Pennsylvania, or at least through New Jersey. He sent General Cornwallis, which is a name that's going to come up a lot later on. He actually sent him to chase General Greene and a detachment of Hessians to set up outposts. This one's going to be kind of fun. But here we go. So we're going to come up towards Christmas now. Washington is just outside of McConkey's Ferry in Pennsylvania. There we go. That was fun. And the Hessians, commanded by Colonel Rahl, are actually just on the other side of the river in Trenton. They got a great view of what's actually going on. Any movement Washington makes, they can actually see it happening, but also vice versa. So, liberty or death, right? That's what comes up now. If you don't know what that means, liberty or death was the password used when Washington decided to take on Trenton. On Christmas Day, the plan was to, Christmas evening, excuse me, let me rephrase that a little bit. On Christmas evening, the plan was to go across the river, the Delaware River, and go and surprise Colonel Rahl and the Hessians. There's about 2,000 Hessians, and we have 2,000 men in our army right now still, but we don't have that many ready for battle. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say we're close to like 1,300 that's actually fit for fighting at this time. So the plan is, let's go this way. Let's stay next to the river. The plan is to have everybody cross the Delaware at one point and then break off into 3 separate lines once we're there. Well, right before, Trenton. So the crossing goes, and we're not going to say without a hitch, because originally the battle was supposed to start at 6 a.m. But it was more around 8:30ish when everybody finally met to make this happen. But we crossed, General Greene with Colonel Knox, who's now Colonel of the Artillery, because obviously he can move it around. While General Sullivan, John Sullivan, he was also part of the original War Council with Greene. He took his own line there, and then General Washington with the other line. So when you broke off, you actually had 3 lines going now, all to meet at, well, originally 6, but they were trying for 8 afterwards. So everybody made it except for Sullivan. Sullivan did make it, but he was a lot later than anticipated. There were no casualties on the Continental side for the Battle of Trenton, but 2 people did die on the way there. They laid down because they were so cold and tired, and this never got back up, unfortunately. So that line where the 2 people had laid down, the ones that had the toughest track,